So meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. That's the second line of the book of Ecclesiastes. And for our modern ears, it doesn't sound so positive. But in the original Hebrew, the word used is Hevel, which means a vapor or a mist or a puff of smoke. The older I get, the more real it feels, like where did all the time go? What he's really saying is to watch where you look for meaning and self-fulfillment, because much of what we chase is just vapor. You can see it, but you can't grasp it or control it. We might look at this as when we think about our ambitions. What are we striving for, and why are we striving? We will, but we're going to save that for another time, maybe a little bit later though. What I want to look at today is, where do we get our self-worth? What's our identity? I think about the number of messages I get bombarded with every day. It seems to me that they're all trying to tell me in some way who I am. Maybe it's because I spent 40 years in real estate and the algorithm knows that, but it also seems that there's been way more intensity in those ideas, in the last five or 10 years. We are constantly told that our value is based in our utility and our output or our last deal. What did you accomplish? What did you do for me lately? And it seems that the teacher in Ecclesiastes, he had a lot of messages like that as well, because he said he tried them all. He determined that they were all Hevel. They were all vapor. He tried wisdom, knowledge, pleasure, folly, toil. We work hard at something. We think it will get us further ahead. We're trying to build a permanent monument. We want to build a legacy, but it doesn't give us ultimate meaning. He refers to it as toil in anxious striving. Then he says something that sounds like a contradiction. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. But he also adds that this too is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? I want to know is, what does he really mean? The teacher realizes that while the results of our hustle are uncontrollable vapor, the daily process, our assigned portion, is actually a gift. And we can finally enjoy that simple portion of our daily work when we understand what truly defines our identity. And the teacher talks about his pursuits to find that meaning. And that's the key point. They're his pursuits. What he concludes near the end of the book is that self-fulfillment comes by following God's plan. And that plan was laid out in the first 2 pages of the Bible. Genesis 1:26-27 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." What was introduced here is what is known as the doctrine of Imago Dei. I'm not a theologian, but I think what it also did is it gave us a vocation. I believe that what this concept means is that every human being has infinite worth and value. We are unique works of art created by a master artist. As such, every person must always be treated with respect and true dignity. That I recognize that last statement might be a little tough to take for some people. But I think if we really want to take a look at it and say, okay, what would happen actually if we did treat everybody like that? This masterpiece view goes directly against our hustle culture, where we're always seeking to have an advantage over someone else. And I wonder what our world would look like if we exercised this principle in our daily interactions with others. Because while outcomes of our toil might evaporate like mist, our interactions with others carry eternal weight. And having lived in a culture that believes in hard work, and I've been thinking about these ideas for a while. How does this speak to the ambition that we mentioned, just a few moments ago? Should we aspire for more? Is that wrong? Is that what I'm saying? I'm not saying that I think that that's wrong. I like this thought that the teacher talks about in chapter 11, verse 6. He says, "Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle, for you do not know how much will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well." He's telling us to do our work and to do it well, and to do it gladly, you know. But we don't know whether or not it's going to do well. It's not up to us. In other words, you know, our ambition shouldn't be about stressing over guaranteed outcomes. It is about active cooperation with God, you know, because we don't know which seed will succeed. We're freed from the illusion of control. Your satisfaction and self-worth don't come from the harvest you produce, but from faithfully tossing your seeds today and enjoying the process of being the masterpiece you were created to be. That's Donner's thoughts for today, and I hope to have more of these coming out. But we'll see. Sometimes I think about them too much, and they don't actually happen. But we're trying to do better at getting some thoughts out. And if you actually liked what you heard or want to hear more, click a like. Thanks.